Hello, everybody, on this last art days, even afternoon, I have to say. Thank you for coming. I mean, it's just the art ends in 4 hours, and I really appreciate that you come and not look at artworks. Thanks very much for being here. My name is Küster. I'm curator at the Beyeler Fondation, and among the things I do is looking after the collection. Looking after the collection means looking after the conservation of collection. I'm not a conservator, I'm a pure, simple art historian. So I'm not going very much into detail when it comes to conservation. I'm more talking about a wonderful work and the problem this work causes and the joy we have with this work. Art 42 Basel is coming to an end in 4 hours, I think. We have seen not many things, and I think it's time to make out some trends in the art world. I think what's really missing is people who tell other people what they think about the actual state of the art, of their contemporary art, and where the trends are. And I think one of the trends, I'm coming to Matisse, no worry. But one of the trends which you see on the art fair at the moment are works on paper. I think this is a big issue at the moment. Works on paper, drawings, collages, and even paper cuts. And just to begin with one work which you hopefully have seen. It's not far from here. It's by Riehen, a German artist, born in 1977, one of the rising stars of she has risen already, I think, one of the shooting stars of this art fair, of the contemporary art scene. She's done an enormously big work which you can see on Art Unlimited, in the Hall of Art Unlimited, not far from here. It's many panels, it's views of trees, and it's work with drawing and with paper cuts. And yesterday night, when I sort of thought about what I would tell you today, I was doing the little journey through the internet and met Riehen in an interview she gave on her work, and she was talking about what would happen to her art in 200 years' time, which I think is quite interesting. I think not many artists of today really think what's happening to their art in even 10 years or even 20 years. What will happen with them in the collection or even in museums? What do the curators or the conservators or well, what would I do with a work which they do today and which will stay there not forever but for a very long time. She thought about this, and she didn't say much about technology. She of course talked about what that would mean to visitors, and she was quite clear about that. Every time would sort of find a path to explain in their own words, in their own way, what this would mean. As a museum curator and someone who takes care of a very nice collection, not very big, but very nice, many masterworks, I'm of course not looking formally or in terms of content on these works. I'm really looking from a technology point of view as well. And that means that we are facing increasing problems with the fragility of paperworks in our collection. Light eats paper. That's the formula we have to deal with all the time. And we have to sort of balance between the wish to exhibit the work and the need to keep it in storage, to keep it in the shade, to keep it in shadow all the time, in order to preserve it for the centuries to come. And that's the reason why we began a big conservation project, which is now in its second year, together with an insurance company called National Suisse. You might know this company. Why is an insurance company interested in doing something like that? Because it's, well, basically, and really in a nutshell, it's actually cheaper for them to invest in the conservation than to restore damage. And they really take great care in looking what's happening with the paper and the state of this work and so on. It's one of the biggest works in our collection. It's, as I already said, it's a paper cut and a drawing, in that sense comparable with Jorin de Voogd's big panel, which you see here, made in 1953, in the year before Matisse died. I'm not having a pointer, that's the reason why I'm walking around, if you don't mind. It's interesting in the sense because, which happens very seldom, you see a combination of drawing, of charcoal drawing, and cut out forms. The forms are colored with gouache, painted with gouache. And what's interesting about this, and from the conservational point of view, really concerning, is that the background sort of deteriorates in a way we don't know really why. I think we have found the solution now. Apparently Matisse wanted to have the background very white, and the contrast between the cutout forms, the charcoal lines, and the background very clear. So that's the reason why he or his assistants, we come to this later, to the very difficult process of work on these masterpieces, why the assistants painted the background white. Why they only half or partly covered the background, why they left out some areas here, it's not clear, and that will be perhaps the most problematic thing to work on, if we work on at all, because in general this piece is in a very good state, in a surprisingly good state. It's just over nearly 6 years old, and when Jorin de Voogd talks of 200 years, we have here 60 years, and it's already sort of, well, it's in a good state, but it's kind of crumbling already. I'm now talking about Matisse just a bit. You know, Matisse, 1869 to 1945. He lived since 1938 above Nice in Cimiez, in this hotel called Hotel Regina. The photograph is a bit misleading because the apartment was, if I'm really informed, over here. But anyway, it's a sort of big hotel overlooking the bay and the Mediterranean Sea. And in 1941, after the occupation of France by German troops, he got very ill and was operated on colon cancer and nearly didn't survive. So the time after 1941, when he already was quite old, and until his death, he called himself une seconde vie, his second life. And his second life would have been increasingly influenced by the idea of finding a new way of expressing himself artistically, and that means that he found the way to the papier découpé, which he began in 1943 in making a big book, which he called Jazz, and then developed from small format to the very big format at the end of his life, this strange or this peculiar technique. He, as I said, was very ill, and he couldn't sleep much. He had to lie in bed very long, and he tried to find a way to express himself artistically. That is one way. You see here, he was lying there. He had these long sticks with the charcoal, and then he drew with his sticks. Whenever you have done this, or in case you have ever tried this, it's extremely difficult, and it's far from being easy. So it's again it's a balance between the pain he suffered, the constant pain he suffered apparently, as a very ill and old man, and the wish to express himself. I mean, you have to carry this with both hands, and to have to press it very firmly onto the wall and make this drawing. For Matisse, cutting in paper was the perfect merge of sculpting, painting, and drawing. Painting because the papers were painted before. Drawing because it had something to do with contour, and a sculptor and sculpting because the scissor, the use of scissor had for him is kind of three-dimensional quality, and the composing of this of the work actually had a kind of three-dimensional quality, a relief-like quality, which he liked to do. Interesting, and that's very interesting for the conservation we are working on, is that the actual work on the paper cuts was very, very short, apparently. There exist films, and if you go to our booth, of the Fondation Beyeler booth, you see a little film there. I had this on my PowerPoint, but it fell off on my way in the tram, apparently. It fell off the USB stick. But anyway, if you see it at our booth, you see how fast the actual work of the cutout forms was, or how quick the artistic work was done. What Matisse really was looking for is the kind of stroke of genius. You see, and perhaps is that really the stroke of genius? Is that really the thing we are looking for when we look at drawings today? I mean, going back to the art fair today and the actual state of the contemporary art, perhaps there is a trend for the stroke of genius in going back to collecting drawings or even paper cuts. Stichwort Jorinde Vogt. Interesting for our work is that everything which fell down next to his wheelchair, was preserved. The Matisse archives have big drawers, and in these drawers are all the cutout pieces, so you can really compare the color then, the color in the shade, in the drawers, with the color which was exposed for a long time in the museums. You have to imagine a very big apartment, empty walls, more or less empty walls, or walls which were sort of arranged to work for the for the inspiration of the painter. It's an interesting photograph done by the sister of one of his, or the cousin of one of his assistants. You see in the background a paper cut, which now is in Washington, in the National Gallery of Washington. That is La Négresse, which we'll see later on. But you see the mirrors as well. He changed mirrors and in order to make the rooms bigger, or he moved around the furniture in order to get more space for the paper cuts. So it's interesting in the surviving photograph. You sort of move in his apartment around and see how he always tried to find new space to develop his works. Famous photograph of Paris Match just when he after his death. But it's a photograph made by John Revolt in 1952, and one sees Matisse in one of his Oriental costumes with one of his assistants cutting, and the assistant entangling the paper. And there you see how Matisse composed the work in sort of directing the assistant on the wall and placing the cut-out forms on the wall. It's an interesting thing that the actual work of the artist, in the traditional sense of, has actually gone, and the work of the artist in the traditional sense, the cutting is already done, and now only the arranging is done. It's a kind of conceptual thing before conceptual art actually is there. That took very long. You know, the cutting went very quick, and the cutting you had to feel the stroke of genius, and the placing was very difficult. It was a very long process and really painstaking, because Matisse, who suffered of insomnia, would like to work day and night, and the assistants, a whole bunch of assistants, had to be at hand every time of the day. Some of them are still alive and like to talk only about the nice aspects of working with Matisse, of course. Some views of his of one corner in his apartment. And you see that he really made some, how should I call this, scenes, and then assembled or let assemble the paper cuts to the actual works. This, for example, this work here, for example, I'm sorry, there's no laser pointer. This work over here, and as I walk, it's sort of moving. Sorry for that. This work here is in our collection now. It's slightly bigger. It's this cutout form, this cutout woman here, called La Grenouille, the frog, was removed from the wall and then put on a layer later. This is a piece which is now in Cologne, the piece of Famissage, for example. This is in a private collection in New York. This is reworked. This has been reworked afterwards, and is now part of a composition called Apollon in Stockholm, and so on. And you see how they moved around, and how everything was constantly moving, and how Matisse constantly found new ways of sort of finding space and views for his different paper cuts. I think one has to keep that in mind, and when one, if one begins to work on this technologically. There another view, you see this work which is called La Négresse, which is now in Washington National Gallery. The paper cuts were fixed on the wall with little nails or needles, And you see here, which is quite interesting, you see here how Matisse experimented with the layer. He was sort of putting ornaments on white paper just to work with on the contrast, and he didn't really care how big that is, and he was sort of thinking bigger than the actual walls of his apartment. The work we do now, or our conservators do now, is of course, and that's going to be a bit complicated now, how the work really is built. You have to imagine that the paper cuts on the walls had to be removed and had to be kept in exactly that way in which Matisse arrangement was done. And they were shipped to Paris to a special firm, a special company specialized in doing paintings and painter supply and all that. Lefebvre Fournet, a company which still exists, and were shipped there in order to make real artwork of it. This was mostly done without Matisse, because Matisse couldn't really travel anymore. He had his main assistant, Lydia Detektorskaya, who oversaw the composition of the actual works. What is very important is that after the paper cuts were put on the wall, the paper cuts were sort of drawn through on transparent paper, and the transparent paper was brought to Paris as well with the paper cut forms. And by using the transparent paper, the paper cut forms were put on the layer on the ground, which was in our case brought from Nice to Paris as well. There are other cases where this layer was sort of made new in Paris. And you see the many dangerous, dangerous things. You have a stretcher. You have different kind of papers and different layers of glue. And the glue apparently is not really eating the paper, which is something new, which we just found out, because it's a non-synthetic. It's a glue based on animal, and that more the problem is between the different layers of paper, of this, especially this paper, this kind of Kraftpapier, this paper to wrap things up, and that really the big issue is light. Interestingly enough is that, as I said at the beginning, that Matisse really wanted to have the background painted white, so that he really painted the background white and not let the paper be pure and untreated, unpainted paper. Of course, yellows very much, or gets brown with the time. Here, he for the first time really wanted to have the background white, and in order to protect the paper, he apparently wanted to have it painted. That's ultraviolet. I don't know how it's called in English actually. An ultraviolet shot of one of the paper cuts, and you see that the way the gouache was brought onto the paper which were cut was not very even. He wanted to apparently have a sort of the feeling of a structure in these gouaches, and what you see as well, and we go into that later on too, is are these little holes of the needles, you know, which were important for keeping the pieces on the wall or actually on the paper of on the wall, because you of course had to have first the paper, first the wall, then the paper, and then the cutout forms which were placed on the paper. In earlier times, I'm not sort of saying where and who done it. In earlier times, these kind of things were sort of restored, which is for us a terrible thing to do, because these sort of rough cuttings or cuts were actually, as I say, the stroke of genius. Which it didn't matter at all to Matisse. He was just the way of cutting, the speed of cutting, and the composition itself was more important than the mistakes he did in cutting things, which is something one always has to keep in mind when looking at these works. Again, interesting details. Sometimes the assistants sort of noted where the actual pieces are by doing drawings or doing lines with pencil. Then Matisse didn't cut it all. He just worked with his hands and scratching it or whatever, however you call it. And so, as I say, this is kind of really rough work, which the result is not really that it's a kind of totally even and nicely surface. You have to feel as I say, the stroke of genius, and we try to still letting this stroke of genius be visible. So this is very interesting, that because this is the only photograph of our work in Nice, in the apartment of Matisse. You see it here because yeah, you can't see it because I'm not having the pointer, but you see it here. Yeah. You see here the nails where the paper was hung, and you see the work installed in his apartment. And we, with the help of Photoshop, try to sort of put the actual state of the work over the black and white photograph, and the cutout forms have hardly moved. That's really fascinating. That the position of the cutout forms was really the most important thing. What has moved just a bit apparently is the. Thank you. You're not hearing me. Okay. What has moved apparently is the background. The forms have actually stayed at the place where Matisse they wanted to be. Anyway, I'm now sort of I'm still a little extract of this photograph, and you see how the big paper was fixed with nails on the walls in Matisse's apartment. Now, in order to make these copies on the tracing paper, you couldn't just put in nails or needles this way. You had to sort of make two holes and keep the whole paper cut forms and the layer flat. So that's the reason why you always find these little holes here, and we have made a kind of, which I can't show really because you can't see anything, but we have made a little mapping of the needle holes, and if you do it, you see how sort of Matisse, how meticulously he sort of keeps the things and places them and comes to find the actual composition. These are things which have been made vanish during the years after Matisse's death, because one thought they are not important, and one thought that this is something which is not belonging to the artwork. We think differently. We think more and more that this is, on the one hand, Matisse didn't care about much. On the other hand, we think it's extremely important really to show how he worked, and that it's part of the work and should be seen. It's not that we make it seen, but we don't make it vanish. Sorry. We have in Riehen installed a restoration studio, which you can look in. It's if you've been in the museum, you can see in the basement this room, and what you see here is, what we are actually doing at the moment, is we sort of restage the work in order to get more knowledge of how Matisse worked, and in order to try to find a way to do some conservation or restoration on that. It's increasingly the case that that conservators and curators like me tend to let the things be as they are, and that's perhaps one of the messages of this talk. Art is apparently not really made to. It is made to stay forever, of course, but it's the more it's conceptual, the more you have to keep in mind that it's kind of vanishing, and I think that this is that one actually clearly can see this on the paper cuts or at the paper cuts of Matisse, and that perhaps the best way of conserving it is really keeping it away from the public as long as you can. That's perhaps a thing one can argue about, discuss about. Keeping it away as long as one can in order to keep to sort of make to make the process of degradation slower, and to exhibit at very special occasions. So I think it's a plaidoyer for doing exhibitions with it, but I think that paper cuts of Matisse are not for permanent collections or permanent displays, are not made for permanent display. The last thing is that I'm showing our paper conservator who really tries to restage one of these paper cuts in order to get more knowledge about how it's done and how we should work on it. It's really an interesting project. Next year it will be finished. We try to do then a little exhibition of the works of the paper cut works in our collection. You know, we have one of the most important Nu Bleu in our collection, Nu Bleu 1, 1952. It's one of these iconic works in the Beyeler collection, as well as La Grenouille, which I have shown. This one and a small paper cut from 1947, and the big two compositions, Océanie, la mer, et it's called La mer et le ciel et la mer. Sorry. And I think the outcome, as I say, will be that we are not really restoring anything, but that we have a lot of insight about how these things are done, and that what we knew before, these things are extremely precious. I think I should leave it here. This is all right. Have I talked a lot? Enough? Oh, yes. If you have questions, please ask questions. Thank you. I see no one is listening, hearing me. I see no questions, so thank you very much for coming. And please drop by our booth, look at the little film showing Matisse. And if you have time, the Beyeler Foundation tonight is open until 8. And then from tomorrow, the normal life starts back again from 10 to 6. Thanks very much.